Think we're good. Hello and welcome to live stream number 44. Um, we have a bunch of exciting things to go over today. And, let me remind myself to pull up the YouTube video here so I can see any questions and comments that are coming in real time. There we go. All right. Feel free to drop your questions and comments in there. And let me jump on in. So this is a topic on no code, Integromat, which I've been digging a lot. And actually, we got to make sure to hashtag this with the Nocodevember hashtag, which is an effort to do a bunch, encourage people to do no code stuff in November. Anyways, so I've been really liking Integromat. I've been building out some cool workflows to do things for my content team. Yesterday I did one the other day that takes time logs, sums them up, creates a payment record for a group of time logs, sends that to Slack, and then it'll sort of send it to PayPal as well. So that was really neat. One of the downsides to the pricing model for Integromat and Zapier, pretty much all of them, they tend to price on essentially on Integromat calls them operations, Zapier calls them zaps and whatever else, tasks or something like that. So like the free plan for Integromat gives you 1,000 operations, which I was like, oh, that's a lot. And then I ended up running out of those. And then I did the paid version for $10 and then I get 10,000 operations. But even with that, I've found that sometimes I'm I was considering doing something yesterday, which would have done would have summed up a number of records, like, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 records or something like that, and done an operation on them. And the way it prices them is that, when you pull in those 40 records, that's 40 operations, and then if you do another operation on those 40 records, that's 40 more operations. And so it can quickly add up, and particularly when testing, like I find that when I'm building a new scenario, that I'll have to test it a number of times. And then I found myself going in and putting limits on the max number of records that it pulls in for a given scenario, just for testing purposes, because I didn't want to use too many of my operations. And so it would be nice if there was a way to make this a little bit more unlimited-ish. I mean, the pricing model makes sense at a high level, but I find that, what's so cool about no code in general and Integromat is that you can just do all sorts of stuff. Like, there's so many different integrations you can do, like the sky's the limit, and it's fun to experiment with things. I found that, at least for me, it kind of kills a little bit of that kind of fun, creative spirit when you have an idea for something and then you go, oh man, I might burn up 100 operations just testing it. And then if I test it 10 times, that's 1,000 operations. And then I'm going to kill, so if there was a way that they could model it out, so that you wouldn't have to think so much about the operations count, I think it would enable more use cases and stuff like that. So that was all that I wanted to say about that. And what is your content routine? Okay, so this next one is a content topic. Whoops. You know what? I'll just type it. What is your content routine? So, what is your content routine? So I was having a conversation with my buddy yesterday, and he was kind of picking my brain about like what my routine is for putting out content, for doing these live streams and things like that. And I've talked a little bit about sort of what my routine is, and And basically it's pretty simple, but just getting into some of the nitty gritty of like, how do you take notes and how do you, find things on Twitter that you want to talk about and how much time does that take each day, and kind of just going over it. It made me think a little bit about like morning routines, which is something that, like Tim Ferriss, for example, talks when he interviews people. He talks a lot. He asks a lot about what does your morning routine look like, and that's something I've always found really fascinating, to learn about what people's mornings look like. And he gets really specific, like what do you eat in the first 30 minutes, and what do you do first, and do you exercise, do you meditate, all these things. And I found that like it's just really interesting to just learn about different people's morning routines, particularly people that are really productive. And so then this phrase content routine, I don't know if this exists or not as a phrase or an idea, but I found myself thinking, like, I was talking about kind of like my routine for generating content. And then I found myself kind of wondering, like, oh man, I'm kind of curious to know, what are other people's content routines? Like, what are the things they do to, particularly people that put out content regularly and put out good content. Like, what does that look like? Like, how do you generate the ideas? How do you take notes? How do you capture them? How much time does it take? Things like that. So, so yeah, this is just something I'm interested in getting to know this more about other people that are creating content. Just personally, I'm interested to know, and I think it could be a useful resource if you aggregated, 10, 20, 30, 100 content routines from different content creators. I think that could be a useful resource for people. So I think that's just something I'm going to start asking people, like, what's your content routine? I think we can learn from, and that's what I liked about the morning routines, is that, I'd hear from people, and then I'd hear recurring themes, and I'd be like, I should really start doing that, or I'd hear something, I'd be like, oh, that's crazy, I'm never going to do that. But like, it definitely helped me to think about optimizing my own routines from learning what other people did. So I think that could be cool. All right. I am moving along at a very brisk pace this morning, which is cool. Probably a good thing. I sometimes move along at a less than brisk pace. Sip of coffee. All right. Let's see here. For this next topic, both of these recent topics were somewhat meta. So for this next topic, I want to talk about my my topic list, which is here on the screen, and font size is probably small, so you're probably not seeing it too well. But so this is another thing I was talking about with my buddy, and I think there's a couple things I wanted to share about it. So actually, this is part of my content routine, is that I take notes throughout the day. I have a Google Keep. I do tweets, and in the morning I sort of review those notes. I review tweets that were interesting to me. I put everything into this Airtable. And it's very simple, it's a very simple little Airtable, but I've added a couple little nuggets to it, which I think have been useful for a number of things. And so, this segment thing here is where, I'm starting to, organize each of the things I talk about into these different segments: e-commerce, content related, fitness, personal, developers, work-related stuff for developers, all these things. And I want to get this list a little smaller because there's too many topics. And I know that not everything I talk about is relevant to like my main audience on Twitter. So I'm trying to be more mindful of like putting stuff out that's relevant to people in certain channels and things like that. So that's one thing. And then the other cool insight that I had as I'm creating content and stuff, and I'm kind of creating a whole lot with these live streams, is that, one of the ways that I was thinking about it was like, okay, I do a stream once a day. I have 7 or 8 topics, and then I decide which of those topics I'm going to put into post-production, which means I'm paying my content team to produce video clips, written content, post to social media. So I only want to put the stuff there that I'm going to get some ROI from, so I'm going to put the Magento related stuff is going to go on my Commerce Hero channel and things like that. And content related stuff is going to go on the Content Accelerator channel and things like that. And so one of the things I was thinking was like, well, if I don't put it into post-production on that day, then it's kind of like the content is sort of lost. Like it kind of doesn't go anywhere, right? Like if I do a clip, if I do a segment on this stream and it doesn't go into post-production, basically virtually no one's going to, very small number of people are going to actually see it. But then what I realized is there's a lot of power, I think, in the aggregation of all these topics. So for example, no code is one of the topics I find myself talking about more frequently because it's something I'm interested in. I did a topic in this stream on no code. I'm not really putting any of my no code stuff into post-production because again, I'm not really getting ROI on it. It doesn't really fit into my businesses. And so it's kind of going nowhere. Right. But then what I realized was that having this reference, having this sort of catalog of all these topics, is something that I can come back to. Let's say a year from now, I do 100 little mini topics on no code. Right. And let's say that none of them ever go into post-production. So for all intents and purposes, they get hardly any visibility whatsoever. And it's kind of this random topic. It's, again, not really related to my businesses. It's like, why are you even talking about that? It's true about a lot of these segments. It's true about no code. It's true about happiness, right? Like I'm doing more stuff on the topic of happiness. It's like, what is the purpose of that? But what I realized is, let's say a year from now, I have 100 topics on no code. I can always go back retroactively. That's what's really powerful about having this list and having the YouTube streams. Having the YouTube streams without this list would make it almost impractical to go back through it retroactively because it's like, what are you going to watch 100 hours of stuff but having this index means that a year from now I can create a view within Airtable. For example, this is my view for Magento stuff. It pulls in all my Magento segments. I can pull up a view on, let's say on no code, and I can have 100 topics. And let's say a year from now, I go, maybe I should create a business in the no code space, or maybe I should, sell this content, right? I've got 100 clips. I've got 5 hours of content that, individually is like not very useful, but like in aggregate, it's like there's probably some value there. Like maybe you could sell that for $10, right? Or whatever. Like just the idea that you can, where am I clipping? Streamed. I have a bunch of these views I'm doing. Just the idea that like, I really love that. I've talked about this before. These streams, the freedom to talk about whatever is of interest without worrying about is there ROI associated to it. Then having a secondary step where I can take the things that do have ROI, post-produce them, and then now this other secondary step where a year from now, I can aggregate things on a topic which maybe seemed like a random topic, and then that can be a body of work now, like happiness or fatherhood, right? I'm doing I've done a couple clips on being a dad. A year from now, if I have 100 clips, I could turn that into a book, right? I could hand that off to a ghostwriter, be like, here is my brain dump on the topic of fatherhood, right? Turn that into a book, turn that into an epic blog post, turn that into whatever, a video course. Like there's so many different ways to do that. So that was just an interesting idea. And I think this would be something cool for people to do in general. It really is a powerful way to put content out, to have that freedom to talk about whatever you want, and then to have the secondary step of where you decide how to actually post-produce. So that is pretty much it on that one. All right, next up. this is on the topic of some Magento libraries, Magento video libraries on some security things that came out, which I saw Talesh post about. And I thought it was cool to see that. And then, Talesh kind of mentioned that the quality of he's happy that the security content is being put out, but the quality of the videos is a little bit on the rough side. And I haven't watched these actual videos myself personally, but I have seen some other videos where, it was kind of this kind of monotone, voiceover with just the video production quality was just not super engaging. So anyway, like my thought here was like, I've talked about, what Vinay is doing with Mage2 TV. And I was like, honestly, they should just fund Mage2 TV to do this content. Now, of course, that would have to fit in with what Vinay wants to do with that. Mage2 TV is focused on developer training, and some of these things may be developer facing, some of them may be merchant facing, especially anything that's developer facing. Like this is one of those cases where you could say on the one hand, listen, it makes sense for the company themselves to be putting out first party content on things like security and on developer training. That's something that should be first party. Like I get that. But then when you look at it and you go, like the quality of what Vinay's putting out is just so good. And like, it makes you think like, well, maybe leveraging the ecosystem makes more sense in this scenario. Or shoot, maybe, acquire Mage2 TV. Who knows? I mean, like all I'm saying is when the quality is so good here, you got to look at it. And I think to myself, like, man, if they could find a way, and who knows if Vinay would even be open to this, I have no idea. But if, they would say, hey, here are these video topics we want to do. Let's fund you to do them. And if it made sense within what he's doing, I think that could be a beautiful partnership. I mean, look at Laravel and Laracasts. If you're at all familiar with the ecosystem, for all intents and purposes, the primary training content for Laravel is not first party to Laravel. It's third party. It's a separate company called Laracast. Now, of course, they have a great relationship between Laravel and Laracasts, but that's what Laracast does. They put out great quality video content. And so a lot of the primary training content for Laravel is Laracasts, right? And so maybe you do the same thing. I mean, I see Mage2 TV as the Laracasts for Magento. And so that's pretty much the idea there. So I just want to put that out there. And so that is all there. Okay. Next up. Bear with me here. Oops. All right. So this is an idea that I have, which is, I don't know how fully baked this idea is. There's probably some people that are going to see this, open source advocates, and are going to cringe a little bit. So let me try to communicate this a little bit. And I think, actually, I think the place where I got this idea was my recent conversation with John Bownds, where he came over and we did a podcast here in the studio. And we were talking about open source, and we were talking about how, John has been a huge advocate for open source throughout pretty much his entire career, not just, really on a philosophical level as well as a practical level. And I was asking the question, like if we look at the last 10 years, like is open source sort of not working as well, right? Are the businesses that are the most successful now are the SaaS businesses. They're not the open source. Like they're not there's a level of simplicity that comes with SaaS, which is very friendly to the end user, which cannot be denied. And his answer to that really stuck with me was that actually the open source, and I'm not saying that John said this, this is sort of my regurgitation of it, but what he said was, all of these SaaS companies are contributing to open source lower in the stack. So whether those are tools they're using, whether it's Linux itself, whether it's PHP, whether it's Ruby, right? Like all of these SaaS companies rely on open source software lower in the stack. So it made me think to myself, like, maybe the overall best model for software companies is that the product itself is SaaS. So it's proprietary, right? It's hosted by the company first party. It's monthly pricing model, that kind of thing. But then they're contributing back to open source components lower in the stack, right? Versus like, hey, the business itself needs to be fully open source. And so, that's basically the idea that I'm kind of noodling on here. And just want to put that out there. I'm sure that a lot of people will disagree with me on this, and that'll be good for me, right? Because I want to better understand this and better think through this, and think of better use cases around this topic and examples of companies that are fully open source, partial open source, things like that. So I want to better think through this. So I welcome the disagreement. All right, next up. This is a Magento module. All right, this is a Magento module I first saw because Aaron Sheehan, all caps, by the way, thank you. Tweeted all caps, thank you. And I pay a lot of attention to what Aaron thinks, generally speaking, particularly within the realm of, I was going to say B2B. This is not, why do I keep thinking this is B2B? It's not B2B, but anyways, this is a new extension from Aurora Extensions. I'm going to just read this tweet. With regard to Magento open source, one frequent objection we hear is the lack of Amazon-style self-service RMA available by default. I definitely agree there. I remember back in my last job where I was in-house with a merchant. I was like, this RMAs need to be simpler. For that reason, we've decided to open source our RMA module, Simple Returns. It's now available on GitHub. A few important things to note. We've built a sample data module for Simple Returns, also available on GitHub. Documentation is relatively sparse and needs work. And then we're working on the REST API and hope to complete in the near-term future, possibly within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Carrier support is limited to UPS and FedEx for now. USPS likely to come in the next few months. So this is cool. I was like, Aurora Extensions. I was trying to figure out if it sounded familiar, sounded somewhat familiar. So they are member of EXTDN, Extension Developer Network, which is awesome, and the Magento Community Insiders Program, which is cool to see because I remember hearing about the launch of the Community Insiders Program, and so it's cool to see what I think is a great little extension company being able to participate in that. So so that's cool. And then this is probably going to go over my head quickly once I get into the GitHub page, but let me dive into this a tiny bit. So I actually saw this here, Nicholas Burr, a good dude in the community. So I think he's the guy behind Aurora. So yeah, let me just see here. So you can kind of see what's going on here. Simple returns, shipping label. So basically, as a customer, I assume it's self-serve. You can log in, you can get your, request your returns, all that kind of stuff. So Yeah, I guess that's probably as deep as I'm going to get into this. But yeah, awesome to see a great, looks like a really quality extension to fill a much needed gap. So congrats to them on that. And if that's something that you need to check out, definitely check it out. Okie dokie. Last up. This is how you know that I have too many of these topic segments. I have one called random, where I put random stuff. I really need to get these pared down because this is just absurd. So this is an interesting tweet I saw from Venkatesh Rao, Twitter username VGR. It is a category error to apply the adjective broken to a complex system. Complicated systems break. Complex systems merely entail hostile configurations relative to you. They're not fixed by your functional expectations. They're still working, just not for you. So this is interesting. This made me think of, like, for example, a lot of times we'll say healthcare is broken, or we'll say, it's something that we say all the time. X is broken, right? Like, I'm trying to think of other examples off the top of my head, and I can't think of anything other than the healthcare one. But I feel like this is something we say all the time about, like, almost everything, right? Like Twitter is broken because, X, Y, and Z. Facebook is broken because X, Y, and Z. And this reframe of they're not broken, they're in hostile configurations relative to you is a really interesting way to reframe it. They are working, just not for you. Like, for example, another example you might say is that XYZ, partnership ecosystem is broken because, it's like, I remember this critique of the, I'm trying to be better about not criticizing. I'm trying to be better about praise individually and criticize by category. So I'm trying to do a better job of that. And so I'm not going to criticize specific things, but like you could say a partnership ecosystem, for example, is broken because the it's all of the longtime partners that have been part of the program forever who are grandfathered into the program, and it's impossible for new people to enter the partner program because of X, Y, and Z. And so you might say, well, the partnership system is broken. It's like, it's not broken. It's in a hostile configuration relative to you, the new partner wanting to get in. For those existing partners, it's working great. They're getting referrals, like everything's working great for them. That's one example of it. And you could, in some ways, you could say it's sort of semantics. But I think it's a useful reframe because it kind of forces you to take ownership of your perspective and where you sit relative to others. Like any complex system. One thing I don't understand about this tweet is the difference between a complex system and a complicated system. But like any complex system, there's multiple parties that are involved in that system. Again, think about a partnership ecosystem. And so, it forces you, like, saying something is broken is an oversimplification that it doesn't force you to think it through as much as you could. You just go, oh, it's broken. Nah, I'm done thinking about it versus it's in a hostile configuration to me, forces you to think through, okay, so what does that mean? Like, who are the people that it is not a hostile configuration to, and why is that? And why is it in a hostile configuration to me? And is there something I can do to change that? And is there a different position I can take? Or if the system does need to be changed, how can I think about changing the system, not just from the perspective of making my life easier, but what about all these other, it just sort of forces you to think about all of the pieces of the puzzle together, which I think is what makes it a really interesting reframe. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, that is all I have for you today. Came in at a tight 29 minutes and 57 seconds, which is pretty good. And thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a fantastic Friday, and I will see you tomorrow.